Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville and the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so thankful that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Thank you so much for taking the time to subscribe to the show. You can find us everywhere podcasts are available, including Amazon Music, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Ghana, Himalaya, and so many other places. Our guest today is Tony Lee Morrell. He's here to celebrate a beautiful, beautiful book. It's a true story, The Cat That Changed America. You know, I really love being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast and giving authors an opportunity to celebrate their fantastic children's books. Could I take a minute to celebrate a children's book that I wrote? It's called The Great Maratini, and it's a really fun book that tells the story of an aspiring, well, some would say clumsy magician. His name is Sam. He's known as the Great Maratini, and lots of his tricks kind of go wrong. It's kind of funny. But the great thing is Sam never gives up on himself. And because of that grit, he's able to do fantastic illusions and transformations. But it was on a journey from one town to another with no crowds around to applaud that Sam discovered that the greatest transformation of all is transforming feelings of caring into action to help another human being. It is a really fun retelling of the story of the Good Samaritan. I think that your kids will love it. I think you'll love it too. You can find it. You can read it for free via Kindle Unlimited. You can also purchase a paperback edition at Amazon. Joining us right now from Los Angeles and California, he is here to celebrate a brand new children's book based on an award-winning documentary film. The name of the book is The Cat That Changed America. Please welcome to the show, Tony Lee Morrell. Tony, how are you?
I'm very well. It's great to be on your podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, it's wonderful to have you here. The Cat That Changed America. We're not talking about the Cat in the Hat, right?
No, the cat is actually a mountain lion or cougar or puma or whatever you like to call it. But it's America's biggest wild cat, and it lives in the middle of Griffin Park. His name is P22, mountain lion. He's got an incredible story which I base my children's book on.
Now, I have to tell you, I have been out to Los Angeles. I've seen Griffin Park. The idea that there is a mountain lion living in the middle of Los Angeles is just kind of hard for me to wrap my head around.
It is quite extraordinary, which is why I wanted to write a book about him. And it really just shows the adaptability of nature, because there's so much pressure on wild animals, especially big cats. But P22 made an incredible journey from his home in Santa Monica Mountains. He was looking for his own territory, and he crossed 2 freeways to reach Griffin Park, and he settled there. And he's now like king of the jungle because he's got his own private deer estate, and he lives in harmony in Griffin Park.
Yeah. And when we're talking about freeways in Los Angeles and California in general, we're not talking about a quaint little 2-lane highway that many people who listen to the show are familiar with. We're talking about major multi-lane, car-filled, vehicle-filled freeways.
That's correct. Heavily congested. He actually crossed the 101 and the 405, two of the biggest freeways in California, and he crossed 10 lanes of traffic each. Can you imagine being a mountain lion having to cross 10 lanes with cars whizzing past you in either direction?
Well, no, I can't imagine being a mountain lion crossing all that traffic. I can't imagine driving on one of those highways and seeing a mountain lion pass in front of me.
Well, some lucky person may have seen P22 Cross, probably at night. And I write a chapter about it in my book. And so maybe someone out there thought they saw an Alsatian or a big cat in a blur. But the sad thing is that most mountain lions don't make it when they cross the freeways because there's a heavy loss on the 101 and the 405. But P22 got very lucky and was very determined to find a new home, so he crossed those freeways.
You were telling me before the show about the name P22. Can you just fill us in? How did this cat earn that name?
Sure. Well, the National Park Service, led by biologists like Jeff Sikich, they tagged the mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains because they wanted to do a study and find out about the effects of inbreeding. So the first one they tagged was P1, that's Puma 1, and he happens to be P22's father. And I call him Prime in the children's book because it just seemed appropriate because he was the first one tagged. And then P22 is the 22nd mountain lion they tagged in the study. And so they've gone up to, I don't know how many they've tagged now, but it may be in the 100. But yeah, it's a great service that they're doing, documenting the mountain lions and their movements.
Wow. Has there been any conclusions reached in this study?
Yes, with many conclusions. The biggest one is how wide-ranging their territories are. They need something like 100 square miles of territory. And the Santa Monica Mountains just doesn't have enough space for all the mountain lions, which is why P22 had to leave. Because males will fight to the death over territory. So I documented that in the children's book. So P22 has a choice, but of course he's surrounded by freeways and the ocean. So he had no choice but to go east. And so I chart his adventures based on storytelling and imagination, what his journey could have been like crossing those two freeways and then crossing Beverly Hills and Hollywood before he reaches Griffin Park.
Wow. How many mountain lions are? Now you mentioned P22 is the king of the mountain in Griffith Park. Are there a lot of other mountain lions in that area?
Well, he's the only one known in Griffith Park. I think there was a sighting of a mountain lion a few years ago in Runyon Canyon, which is nearby. But as I mentioned, he got lucky. Most of the mountain lions aren't lucky enough to cross the freeways and they get killed by traffic, or they're hemmed in the woods and the encroaching areas around, such as Santa Susana Mountains or Santa Monica Mountains. So he's really the only one. And that's the thing about P22. As Beth Pratt, who's one of the leading conservationists in the film, says, you know, what's it like to be stuck in traffic and dateless on a Friday night? He'll die a lonely bachelor, which is very sad because it's very unlikely he'll ever find a mate.
Yeah. I'm curious, you're an award-winning documentary filmmaker. What inspired you to turn the film into a book? We oftentimes hear about books being adapted into film. Don't often hear the reverse. What was your inspiration?
Well, it's to reach a younger audience, and also it was the timing because it's something, the film was made a few years ago, but last year during lockdown, it gave me plenty of time to think and write. And also they're starting to build the wildlife crossing over the 101 this spring, which is a major part of the documentary film and the movement of Save LA Cougars, headed by Beth Pratt and the National Wildlife Federation. And so it's just seemed like a good time to reach young children who care very much about wildlife and conservation, reach a new audience with this children's book. So it seemed to be good timing to tell the story to a whole new generation and get them to care about wildlife too.
Yeah. Now, I suppose some people listening to this might think, oh yeah, okay, filmmaker or an author of a children's book, they're both storytellers, and that's true. But I'm imagining that the process of making the Cat That Changed America documentary film was a lot different than creating this children's book. Am I right about that?
Well, in some ways, yes. Whether you approach a film or a book, it's all about good storytelling. So you need good characters to tell the story. I had a great cast in The Cat That Changed America, as well as Beth Pratt. There was Miguel Ordiñana, a wildlife biologist who was the first person to discover P22 through his camera traps. And there's also Poison Free Malibu, a grassroots organization who are very passionate about caring for wildlife and advocating against rat poison, which is another theme in the story. So the approach for a book was slightly different because I had to induce humour in it for children. I've made children's TV programs for the past, and so I know that to get to children, you need character and humour and warmth and empathy. So I created these fun characters in my imagination, like a raccoon who helps P22, as well as P22's family, because I had P1 Prime as his father, and I imagined what he could have been like. Was he like a Shere Khan character from a Jungle Book? I also had P22's mother and P22's brother. And creating this whole family, given what happens to mountain lions in the Santa Monica, it was almost like a Game of Thrones because you've got these characters and their interactions. So I used my imagination to tell that story.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to somebody who is listening to this thinking, oh, yeah, save wildlife and endangered species? Absolutely. But, boy, do we really need mountain lions in Los Angeles?
Well, P22 is an ambassador for urban wildlife. We certainly need wildlife. And since we're all hemmed in during lockdown or shelter in place, I think we've been appreciating wildlife and nature even more, even if it's a window to look out at the birds or the flowers. So why not have a mountain lion in the middle of Griffin Park? He hasn't harmed anyone. He actively avoids people. As I mentioned, he's become a mascot. People like the fact that he's there. He's got such charisma and spades. And it's just an acknowledgement that we need to share our space with wildlife. And to do that in the future, we need to care about wildlife.
Yeah. I'm happy that you mentioned that P22 will go out of his way to avoid contact with humans. Here in Boston, we have a fairly large population of coyotes, and with the pandemic, they're a little bit more visible, and people are just kind of freaking out about it. And the reality is that coyotes, like P22, they don't want to interact with human beings. They're more afraid of us than we are of them.
That's right. I mean, animal needs are quite similar to ours. They need food, they need shelter, they need a place to live, and they need companionship. And so coyotes are much maligned in the US. They're seen as scavengers, but they suffer through the effects of rat poison as well up the food chain, or they suffer. If we're putting trash out, we're inviting animals into our gardens, so that's why it's good to seal trash cans. But live and let live. Coyotes fill a very important place in the food chain, catching small animals or eaters of carrion. So, but they have their role too.
Yeah. What is it that inspired you to get into creating film? It's creating film, movie making. It's a kind of a dream for a lot of people, but it's a dream that's really hard for a lot of people to attain. It takes a lot of dedication and perseverance. What was it that gave you that perseverance to make a career out of filmmaking?
Well, my career started at the BBC Natural History Unit because I did my degree in science, and I was always interested in science storytelling and nature storytelling. So after uni, I started as a researcher. But I think it's actually a lot more easier now than when I started 28 years ago, because the digital formats have changed. I mean, you can film a short film on your iPhone these days because the landscape, the digital content has changed. So as I keep saying, all you need is a good story and passion and an eye for storytelling. And there's much more outlet now for releasing your content, whether it's through social media. And if you make a story or a film that resonates with people, it will find an audience. Yeah.
You know, now that you mention it, you are absolutely right. We do have many more tools. I wrote and produced and was featured in a video, disabilities awareness video that was produced in 1989. And that was a really huge endeavor, you know, cost tens of thousands of dollars to put together just with 3 different cameras and weeks of editing and really really difficult editing and tedious. But nowadays, we're all carrying around cameras in our pockets that were much, much better cameras than I was paying thousands of dollars to use 30-something years ago. We talk here on the podcast about how beneficial it is for families to read together and to share stories together. I'm imagining that it could be a lot of fun for a family to take those cameras that are in our pockets and to go out and make a film together.
I agree with that, and there's ample opportunity now in lockdown to do that. I think we just need to be more creative in our storytelling and how we reach an audience. But through social media, I think it's very possible. Tools for editing have changed. They've got a lot more easier on Max or Avid. And so if you've got a good story and you've got the passion, then I just say go for it.
Yeah. So what would be the first step if a parent is listening out there and they have kids that are creative and interesting? What would be the first step to get that family project going?
Well, I think it's to be able to pitch your story. As a filmmaker, we always say, what's your elevator pitch? Mm-hmm. How can you pitch a story in a couple of sentences? Or if you're in an elevator with a commissioning editor, how are you going to tell your story in 30 seconds? So if you're sure of your story and what story you want to tell, then the rest of it will follow, and you've got to have the passion to follow that through. But do something which you're really passionate about, whether it's a cause or if it's a local story or if it's a community story, just something that's close to your heart, because then that'll give you impetus to finish it. As I mentioned, the book took me a few years to write after the film, but I was very dedicated and I wanted to get that story out there.
Yeah. I'm imagining that as a family sits down and reads The Cat That Changed America together, and talking about that and talking about wildlife and what we can do to conserve wildlife, that might be a great place to start that family film, just to go out and to start to investigate and document what kind of wildlife are living, that are sharing our home and our space with us.
I agree, and America's such a beautiful continent. There's so much great wild space, whether it's urban wild space or you're out in the mountains or forests. But there's so many stories in the US. I mean, it's a beautiful land. We've got amazing wildlife. And so I would choose something which is topical for the place that you live. And certainly there's a real demand at the moment for young people interested in conservation. They're interested in climate change. You've got young ambassadors like Greta Thunberg, who are really a great role model for young people today. And so there's huge potential, I feel.
Yeah, I do too. And we need to remember that wildlife, when we're talking about wildlife, we're not just talking about mountain lions and coyotes. We're talking about bees and creepy crawly things in our gardens.
That's right. And bees are, fascinating creatures, and they're suffering a precipitous decline. We're losing a valuable source because they play a crucial role in pollination and cross-fertilization. Bats are another species which are dear to me, and they're also suffering. Amphibians, they're going through a lot of habitat loss. We're losing many species of frogs, for example, because of shrinking habitat, as well as climate change, which is affecting, for example, the polar bears. So there's a whole raft of stories out there. But I also think it's very important to focus on the positivity like P22, because it's through engagement. You've got to fall in love with that creature to be able to care for it. So there's still a lot of good reasons to be positive, I think. Yeah.
Now, you were mentioning to me before the interview started that P22, he's become a celebrity and a real Hollywood star in his own right.
That's right. Everyone's fascinated about him, his movements. He was recently captured on the neighborhood camera surveillance passing their house. he's well loved among the Los Feliz community near Griffin Park. Everyone's fascinated about his love life. As I said, unfortunately, everyone's trying to pair him up with cougar sightings that they see any female which may have crossed paths within a 200-mile radius. But he's just captured the art of being elusive yet attainable. It's great to be photographed, and he's got such charisma. So he is a movie star.
What's next coming from you? What are future projects are you working on that our families might be interested in checking out?
Well, if The Cat That Changed America picks up as a book and people like it, I'm very keen to do a sequel. As I mentioned, I just concentrated on his journey to the park, which is the first 18 months of his life. But he's now, I think, about 11 or 12 years old. And so he's got a couple of years left in him, see where that goes. But there's plenty of adventures, as I mentioned, breaking into the zoo is one of them, or getting stuck underneath a house and creating worldwide interest. I also wrote a children's novel based in Central California about a girl who falls in love with a ghost called Ghost Maven, which has just been republished. So I think my love of California will probably incite more stories because it's a great state and beautiful landscape.
Wow. I know people are going to want to know where they can connect with you and learn more about The Cat That Changed America and about the other creative projects that you're working on.
Sure. Tony Lee Morale is my Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, so that's easy. And I've got a website, www.thecatthatchangedamerica.com, and then you can find out all about the latest comings and goings of P22.
Yeah. Well, we've had a great time talking to the author of the new children's book, The Cat That Changed America. He's also the creator of the award-winning documentary film. Are there places where folks can see the original film?
Yes, it's just now being made available for the distributor Earth Touch. So that's available through my website. But I think you can only just pay like $1 to watch it. It's really easy now to watch it. It's on video on demand.
Awesome. We've had a great time talking to our guest, Tony Lee Morale. Tony, thank you so much for being part of our show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be our friend, Jessica Laurel Kane. She will be back to celebrate Anchors in the Storm. It really is a fantastic conversation. You don't want to miss it. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you would, please take a minute to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. If you are a parent or an educator, a grandparent, or other caregiver, you want to check out readingwithyourkids.com. Check out our Certified Great Read Wall of Fame. You could find the next addition to your family library. Also want you to sign up for our newsletter. My daughter does such a great job letting you know what's coming up on the podcast, what you might have missed, and also sharing some other great information with you. You can do that at readingwithyourkids.com. If you're an author, you absolutely want to go to the website. You can find out about our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. Find out how you can have your book displayed on our Wall of Fame. And also find out how you can be a guest on the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to thank our guest, Tony Lee Morale. Please be sure to check out The Cat That Changed America. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, our amazing interns, Hannah Pat Oboyski, Alexia Brown. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, I want to thank you. You're a real superhero. You are doing so much for your kids. And you're doing so much for the world, too, because every time you read with your kids, you're making the world a better place. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.